In the endless stretch of the galaxy, the Othiri ruled with an iron grip, their technology far surpassing that of any known civilization. They had conquered hundreds of worlds, bending countless species to their will. Their empire stretched across the stars from one end of the universe to the other. Yet there was one law that no Othiri dared break. No matter how powerful they were, no matter how many worlds they subjugated, it was a law known only to the most powerful beings within their society. The law that humans were untouchable, they could not be harmed under any circumstance. Though no one could explain why it had been instituted, all Othiri knew was that it was sacred, an ancient decree from a time long before their empire had risen. The law had kept them from interfering with the humans for centuries, and now it was becoming a problem as the Othiri had recently set their sights on Earth, a small and insignificant planet in the grand scheme of things, yet one that had begun to stir with activity. Humanity was advancing faster than anticipated, building ships capable of reaching the farthest corners of space. Their technology, while still rudimentary compared to the Othiri, was showing promise. Their curiosity had led them to explore the stars, and that exploration was catching the eye of the Empire. The Othiri had long believed that the humans were little more than a nuisance, no match for the advanced forces of their empire, but recent reports from the border worlds told a different story. Earth was more than just a nuisance, it was a growing threat. As the humans expanded into space, they became aware of the Othiri presence, and their first encounter with the Empire was one of defiance. Humanity had fought back against the Othiri in ways the invaders could not understand. Their weapons had been primitive but effective, and the humans had an uncanny ability to survive under the harshest of conditions. It was the first sign that something was wrong, that something was deeply different about these humans. No matter how much the Othiri pushed against them, the humans refused to break. Their spirit was unshakable, and their technology, while rudimentary, was often unpredictable, a mystery that left the Othiri unsettled. It was during one of the many skirmishes that Varash, a young Othiri officer who had risen through the ranks with impressive speed, was given a special assignment. His task was simple: track down and eliminate any human resistance forces within the outer colonies. But as he observed the humans from a distance, something about them caught his attention. He had studied the humans for months and noted their strange ability to adapt their technology quickly and fight back with tenacity that defied logic. But it was something more than that, something beyond their ability to outsmart the Othiri. Their strength seemed to come from an inner source, something intangible yet undeniably powerful, and he couldn't shake the feeling that this was no coincidence. It was as if the humans were shielded from harm, an invisible force surrounding them, keeping them alive against all odds. In all of his years serving the Empire, Varash had never encountered anything like it. He had heard the rumors of the ancient law that protected the humans, but to him it had always seemed like a superstition, nothing more than myth whispered by the oldest Othiri when they spoke of the past. But as he witnessed the humans' resilience firsthand, he began to wonder if there was truth to the legend. The thought plagued him, and he found himself questioning everything he had been taught. The Othiri had always been the masters of the universe, the unchallenged rulers of the galaxy, yet here they were staring at a species that refused to bow, and in doing so they had become a mystery, one that could no longer be ignored. Varash couldn't dismiss the growing unease that gnawed at him every time he observed the humans in action. It wasn't just their tenacity that unsettled him, it was their complete disregard for the power the Othiri wielded. They fought not just with weapons, but with a will to survive that went beyond mere instinct. They were unpredictable. Even in the face of annihilation, they always found a way to endure. The more Varash studied them, the more he became convinced that the humans had something none of the other species in the galaxy had, something that made them different. It was as if the very laws of the universe bent around them, protecting them from harm, keeping them alive. No matter the cost, what he had dismissed as superstition now felt like something he could no longer ignore, and he was determined to uncover the truth behind it. The Othiri Council, however, had no such concerns. Their focus was clear: Earth was to be neutralized. Humanity's technological advancements could not be allowed to grow unchecked any longer. They had already begun testing human defenses with devastating precision, launching a series of attacks on Earth's outer colonies and beyond, yet each time they were met with surprising resistance. Each failed attempt only drove the Othiri to escalate their plans. Now they were preparing for the final strike, a full-scale invasion, led by one of the most formidable Othiri generals, Kajana, a being whose ruthlessness was only matched by his skill in combat. Varash had heard the tales of Kojan's victories across the galaxy, how he had single-handedly crushed entire civilizations and brought them to heel, but something about this operation felt different to him. It felt off. As the Othiri fleet gathered on the edge of Earth's star system, Varash was once again called to the front lines. But this time, he was ordered to accompany a covert strike team to Earth itself. Their mission was to infiltrate the human capital and capture key leaders for interrogation. They would learn the secret behind humanity's untouchable status and end this strange anomaly once and for all. With Kajan's forces closing in, Varash couldn't shake the feeling that the humans were not just resisting out of desperation. There was something more behind their resistance, something deeper at play. Upon arrival, Varash and his team immediately moved to secure the human leaders, a task that proved more difficult than expected. The humans fought back with a ferocity that was unlike anything the Othiri had experienced before. They were organized, relentless, and their weapons, while primitive, had an unpredictability that constantly caught the Othiri off guard. In the chaos of the skirmishes, Varash couldn't help but be impressed by the human spirit. They fought not for victory, but for survival, and somehow that made them far more dangerous than any force he had ever faced. As the operation unfolded, Varash began to realize that this was no ordinary resistance. They were fighting something far more powerful than he had ever encountered before. He saw it firsthand when a human officer was captured and brought before him. In an attempt to break them, the human simply smiled and withstood the most brutal interrogation techniques the Othiri could muster. They remained calm, unbroken. No matter how severe the torture, Varash was baffled. How could this be possible? No one could survive this kind of brutality without breaking. This strange resilience was becoming clearer to him, but even more troubling was the fact that the humans seemed to know something the Othiri didn't. They weren't just surviving, the human resistance was adapting their strategy, constantly shifting in ways that defied the Othiri's understanding. They had an almost intuitive grasp of their enemies' weaknesses and were using it against them with alarming precision. The more Varash observed, the more he began to suspect that the humans' resilience wasn't a fluke. It wasn't just their will to survive, it was something more, something hidden beneath the surface, something that the Othiri had never accounted for, and perhaps most unsettling of all, it was something that no amount of force could destroy. The days that followed only deepened Varash's confusion and sense of foreboding. He had seen countless species submit to the might of the Othiri, with little more than a fraction of the resistance the humans displayed. Yet here they were fighting with a spirit and unity that defied all logic. Each time the Othiri thought they had gained the upper hand, the humans found a way to turn the tide. Their technology was still primitive compared to the Othiri's, but it was unpredictable, erratic, and full of surprises. Every battle felt like a test that the humans seemed to pass over and over again. It was during one of these clashes that Varash found himself separated from his team, caught in a firefight between the Othiri strike forces and human militia. He was forced to take cover behind a destroyed building. As the battle raged around him, the humans seemed to have an uncanny ability to use the environment to their advantage, setting traps and launching counterattacks with deadly precision. Each step he took felt as though the humans were always one step ahead. Then it happened. A human soldier stumbled into his line of sight, their uniform torn and bloody, but their expression unwavering. The soldier was clearly injured, but they fought on, moving with a determination that made Varash pause for a moment. He watched as the soldier laid down, suppressing fire, and then with a quick motion slipped behind a piece of cover, a movement so precise and deliberate it left Varash with the distinct feeling that this human soldier knew exactly where he was and what he was planning to do next. Varash hesitated for a moment as the human soldier disappeared into the shadows of the battlefield, but something about the encounter stayed with him. He had seen countless warriors fight for their lives in this galaxy, but none had fought like this. None had fought with the kind of certainty and resilience that seemed to come from somewhere deeper. It was as if the human soldier had known the outcome of the battle before it even began. This encounter was the catalyst for Varash's growing obsession. With the humans, their unpredictability had become a pattern that he could not ignore. Each time the Othiri believed they had predicted their movements or outsmarted them, the humans shifted in ways that defied all strategy. It was as if the very laws of combat were bent to the will of the humans themselves. Back in the Othiri command center, Varash began to dig deeper into the ancient records, the ones reserved only for the highest ranks of their society. He had heard whispers of the law that protected humanity, but had always dismissed it as a superstition. But now the law seemed to be more than that. It was as though humanity had been granted something that no one else in the galaxy had been given, something that made them untouchable. He pored over the records late into the night, and then he found it. The ancient texts spoke of a time long before the Othiri rise to power, a time when the first sentients had ruled the galaxy. The texts were cryptic, but there was one clear message hidden within them. The first sentients had created humanity, not as a mere species, but as a safeguard against the eventual rise of the Othiri and other oppressive forces. They had imbued humans with an innate power that made them resilient beyond measure. It was not just their physical bodies that were protected, it was their very essence. Their will to survive had been amplified to such an extent that no force in the galaxy could extinguish it. As the realization dawned on Varash, he felt a chill run through him. He now understood why the Othiri had never been allowed to harm the humans, why they had always been considered untouchable. This was no accident. This was a divine protection, something that even the Othiri could not break. And he knew that the more the Empire pushed the humans, the more they would discover just how deep that power ran. Varash stood in stunned silence as the truth unfolded before him. The revelation shook him to his core. The humans were not simply a species to be conquered. They were the creation of the first sentients, the beings who had shaped the very fabric of the galaxy in their image. The Othiri had always believed themselves to be the dominant force in the universe, but they had never understood the full implications of the humans' existence. No matter how much power they wielded, no matter how many worlds they controlled, they could not touch the humans, because they were protected by a force beyond their comprehension, and that force was growing stronger with every passing day. Varash had always been taught that the Othiri were the rightful rulers of the stars, that their superiority was absolute, that no species could stand against them. But now he found himself questioning everything he had been led to believe. The more he learned about the humans, the more he realized that their resilience was not a simple quirk of nature. It was a weapon crafted by the first sentients themselves, designed to prevent the rise of tyrannical empires. Like the Othiris, he had always viewed the humans as little more than primitive beings to be crushed underfoot, but now he saw them for what they truly were, a species that had been chosen to endure and protect the galaxy from forces that would seek to dominate it. The Othiri Council, unaware of Varash's discovery, pressed forward with their plans to destroy humanity once and for all. Their patience had worn thin. Earth had become a thorn in their side, a symbol of defiance that could not be ignored any longer. General Kojan was tasked with leading the final assault on the planet. He was a being of legendary power and ruthlessness, a warlord who had brought entire civilizations to their knees. Without a second thought, he had never been challenged in battle, and had no doubt that the humans would fall as easily as any other species they had encountered. As the Othiri fleet gathered in orbit around Earth, Varash's doubts began to fester. He had long respected General Kojan for his tactical brilliance and unflinching resolve, but he could no longer ignore the gnawing suspicion that this war was different, that the humans were not just fighting to survive. They were fighting for something far greater, something that Kojan could never understand. Varash knew that if the humans were destroyed, the galaxy would fall into an era of darkness that would be impossible to undo. Yet the Othiri leadership was blind to this truth. Their lust for power overshadowed everything else. Varash made a decision he could not ignore. He had to act before it was too late. He approached Kojan with a request that would change everything. He knew the general would never listen to the counsel of a subordinate, but he had no choice but to try. General Kojan, Varash said, his voice steady but laced with urgency, "We cannot destroy Earth without consequence. The humans are not like any other species we have encountered. They are Kazan turned his cold gaze upon Varash, his expression unreadable. "Speak plainly, officer," he commanded, his voice devoid of emotion. Varash hesitated, but then pressed on. "The humans are the legacy of the first sentience. They are protected by something far beyond our reach. They are untouchable, and if we destroy them, we risk provoking the wrath of forces that even we cannot comprehend." Kazan's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Varash thought the general might dismiss him outright. But then Kazan spoke in a voice that chilled Varash to the bone. "I know what you are suggesting, but you are wrong, Varash. There is no force greater than the Othirine, no power that can stop us. And if these humans are the creation of the first sentience, then they are no more than relics of an ancient past. They do not belong in this galaxy." Varash felt a deep unease settle in his chest as he realized that Kazan was beyond reason. The general had already made up his mind Earth was to be obliterated, and nothing would stand in his way. Varash could not allow this to happen, but he also knew that opposing Kazan directly would be disastrous. There was no way to defeat the general's forces in open combat, but Varash had one last hope. He would find a way to protect the humans and reveal the truth to the Othiri before the Empire's blind ambition led them all to ruin. Varash moved swiftly through the dimly lit corridors of the Othiri warship, his mind racing with the weight of the decision he had just made. The more he thought about the humans, the more convinced he became that they were not just a threat to the Othiri Empire, but a key to something much larger, something that could reshape the fate of the entire galaxy. If the humans were destroyed, it would be the beginning of an irreversible shift, a power vacuum that would plunge the galaxy into chaos and darkness. But convincing the Othiri leadership of this truth was a challenge he was not sure he could overcome. As he walked toward the secure chamber where the High Council convened, Varash felt a surge of frustration and fear. He had never been more certain of anything in his life. Yet he knew that presenting his findings to the Council would be no easy task. They had been blinded by their own arrogance. Their belief in their superiority had left them incapable of seeing beyond their own desires. They could not see the humans for what they truly were, a force of nature meant to keep balance in the universe. The council chambers were vast and imposing. As Varash entered the room, his gaze was drawn to the towering figures, seated in the high seats of power, their eyes cold and calculating, each one a symbol of the Othiri's might. Their minds focused on the coming invasion, the destruction of Earth, the end of humanity. But Varash was not deterred. He knew that if he could just make them understand the implications of their actions, they might reconsider. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized how unlikely that was. The council's leader, an elder Othiri known as Supreme Warden Trask, regarded him with an almost dismissive glance as Varash approached. "Officer Varash," Trask's voice was sharp and commanding, "do you bring news of the human resistance's defeat, or do you waste our time with your doubts?" Varash's heart pounded in his chest, but he forced himself to remain calm. "Supreme Warden Trask," he began, his voice steady but filled with urgency, "I bring news of something far more important than the resistance. We have underestimated the humans in ways we cannot fathom. Their survival is not a matter of strategy or technology. It is something much deeper, something that has been hidden from us." The council shifted in their seats, their attention piqued by his words. But Varash could see the skepticism in their eyes. They had never considered the humans to be anything more than a nuisance, a species ripe for conquest and control. "Explain yourself," Trask said with a tone that was both cold and curious. Varash took a deep breath before continuing. "The humans are the legacy of the first sentience. They were not created by accident or evolution. They were designed as a safeguard against the very kind of empire we have built. The first sentience knew that an unchecked force like the Othiri would one day rise, and so they imbued humanity with a power that made them untouchable." There was a stunned silence in the room. The council members exchanged glances of disbelief. Some even laughed under their breath, as if dismissing his words as pure fantasy. But Varash pressed on. "I have studied the ancient texts. I have seen the evidence. The humans are not just a weak species fighting for survival. They are a force of nature. Their resilience is not a random quirk. It is a gift granted to them by the first sentients themselves, and if we destroy them, we risk awakening something far more powerful than we can imagine. For the first time since he had entered the room, the council began to murmur amongst themselves, their expressions shifting from dismissive amusement to unease. Trask's gaze hardened as he stared down at Varash, his voice a low growl. You speak of the first sentients as if they still hold power in the galaxy, but they are gone, Varash. Their empire fell eons ago, and we have risen in their place. We are the ones who shape the future now. Varash met Trask's gaze without flinching. But we are not the only ones shaping the future, Supreme Warden. He said, his voice low but unwavering. The first sentient's gift to humanity cannot be undone. It is not just a matter of survival for the humans. It is a matter of balance. They are the safeguard against unchecked power. And if we destroy them, the galaxy will fall into a darkness that we cannot control. The council sat in silence, the weight of his words settling over them like a heavy shroud. Varash knew he had made his case, but he also knew that the Othiri were not a species known for listening to reason. They would either see the truth or condemn him for his defiance. He could only hope that his warning would reach them before it was too late. The silence in the council chamber stretched on, thick and suffocating, as Varash's words lingered in the air. For a long moment, no one spoke, the high-ranking Othiri pondering the implications of what he had just revealed. The tension was palpable, and Varash could feel the weight of every eye upon him, their collective gaze cold and calculating. He had said his piece, and now there was nothing more he could do but wait for the council to make their judgment. Supreme Warden Trask, the leader of the council, was the first to break the silence. He leaned forward in his seat, his piercing eyes narrowing as he regarded Varash with a look that could have frozen a star. You have made a bold claim, Officer Varash, Trask said slowly, his voice laced with both skepticism and curiosity. But you speak of ancient myths and long-lost legends. The first sentients may have once held power, but they are no more. Their time has passed, and we are the ones who determine the fate of this galaxy now. Varash held his ground, his stance unwavering. The first sentients may be gone, Supreme Warden, but their influence remains. Humanity is the living proof of their legacy, and if we continue to ignore that, we will doom ourselves, and the galaxy with it. A murmur rippled through the council members, but Trask remained unshaken. And what do you propose we do then? Trask asked, his voice a low growl. Allow the humans to continue their expansion. Allow them to challenge the might of the Othiri Empire, and potentially become a greater threat than they already are. Varash's voice was firm and resolute. We must find a way to coexist with them, to understand their true nature. We cannot simply crush them underfoot like we have with so many other species. There is more at play here than we can comprehend, and if we destroy them, we risk igniting a conflict that will consume us all. For a moment, Trask remained silent, his gaze locked on Varash, as if weighing his every word. Finally, he spoke again, his voice cold but contemplative. You are asking us to reconsider everything we have ever known, Varash, to abandon centuries of doctrine and to place our trust in the unproven capabilities of a primitive species. The council members exchanged uneasy glances, but the words of the young officer had planted a seed of doubt in their minds. Some were still unconvinced, clinging to their belief in the absolute superiority of the Othiri, but others, more cautious and pragmatic, were beginning to entertain the idea that Varash might be right. Kojan, the general of the Othiri forces, who had been sitting in the back of the room, spoke up, his voice like gravel. I have heard enough, he said, his tone dripping with disdain. Varash's concerns are meaningless. The humans have already shown themselves to be a threat to our rule. We cannot afford to waste time contemplating their nature or purpose. We must strike now, before they become an even greater menace. Varash's heart sank, but he refused to give in. General Kojan, the humans may be a threat, but they are not the threat we think them to be. They are not our enemies in the way you believe. If we destroy them now, We will create a power vacuum that will bring about far worse consequences. I have seen their resilience, their strength. They are not just fighting for survival. They are fighting for something greater, something we cannot yet understand. Kejin stood up, his towering figure casting a shadow over the room. Enough, he said, his voice ringing with authority. The decision has been made. We will not waste any more time on these primitive creatures. They will fall before the might of the Othiri, just as every other species has. Varash's stomach churned with dread as he realized the council was already committed to the invasion. There was no turning back now. But even as Kejin's voice boomed throughout the chamber, Varash knew one thing for certain. The Othiri were making a grave mistake, and it would cost them everything. As the council's decision was sealed, Varash's thoughts turned to Earth, to the humans who had shown him a strength he had never imagined. He knew that time was running out, and if there was any hope of saving them, of saving the galaxy, it would have to come from within. The Othiri were too blind, too consumed by their hunger for power to see the truth, but he could no longer stand by and watch them destroy the one thing that had the potential to stop them. The next move was his, and it would be a dangerous one, but Varash was prepared to risk everything. For the humans, for the galaxy, and for a future that was no longer written in the cold logic of Othiri rule. Varash spent the next few days in a daze, torn between duty and the undeniable truth he had uncovered. The Othiri were marching toward their own destruction, and there was nothing he could do to stop them, at least, not openly. His every thought was consumed by the humans, by the incredible power they wielded, and the fate that awaited them. He knew the Council's decision was final, and the invasion would proceed without hesitation. Yet he couldn't shake the gnawing certainty that if the humans were wiped out, it would set off a chain of events that could lead to an empire-wide collapse. Still, Varash knew he couldn't go against the Empire directly, not without risking his life, and the lives of those he cared about. The Othiri were not a people who tolerated traitors, and the consequences of defying them were severe. But as his thoughts swirled in turmoil, an idea began to take root. It was a desperate plan, one filled with danger and uncertainty, but it was the only way he could see to preserve humanity's future, and, in turn, the galaxy's. That night, after the Council's final approval of the invasion, Varash slipped away from the command center, heading toward the lower levels of the warship where the most sensitive equipment was housed. He had worked in the intelligence division for years, and his knowledge of the Othiri systems gave him a unique advantage. If there was any chance to warn Earth, to give the humans a fighting chance, he would have to act swiftly and discreetly. Deep within the ship, in a secured room that held the Othiri's communication arrays, Varash began his work. His fingers moved quickly across the console, bypassing layers of security protocols with ease. Time was of the essence. He needed to send a message, one that would reach Earth without alerting the Othiri fleet. A warning, perhaps, or a code that could help the humans understand what was at stake. His heart pounded as the system began to crack open, the hum of the data streams filling his ears. With each passing second, the risk grew. If he was caught, he wouldn't just be executed. His actions could lead to the annihilation of any hope the Othiri had for a peaceful future. But even with the weight of those consequences pressing down on him, he had no choice. Then, just as he was about to transmit the message, the door to the room opened, and Varash froze. His body went rigid as he looked up to see the figure standing in the doorway, a fellow officer, one of his oldest friends, Hantas, a seasoned veteran of the Othiri military. The older officer's face betrayed no surprise, but his eyes burned with suspicion. "You've been acting strange, Varash," Hantas said quietly, his voice filled with an ominous calm. "What are you doing here?" Varash's mind raced. He had prepared for many outcomes, but this was not one of them. He could fight Hantas, perhaps, but doing so would surely raise alarms, and the mission would be compromised. He had to think fast. "I'm accessing some classified information," Varash replied, his voice steady, but laced with a hint of tension. The humans, there's something you don't understand. We can't destroy them without consequences. Lantessa's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Varash saw the flicker of recognition in his old friend's gaze. Lantas had always been loyal to the Othiri Empire, but they had both shared a bond of mutual respect. If there was any chance to sway him, now was the time. "I know what you've been learning, Varash," Lantas said softly, his voice almost a whisper. "You're not the only one questioning this war. There are others, more than you think. But it's too late. The Othiri have already set their course. We can't stop them. The humans will fall, just as all the others did." Varash's chest tightened. He had hoped for more from Lantas, but the reality was cruel. His friend had already chosen his side. The war machine was too powerful, and the resistance, if there was any, was far too fragmented to stop the invasion now. But it wasn't over. Not yet. Varash knew he had to act quickly before the opportunity vanished. Without another word, he made his decision. He locked eyes with Lantas, and in a single decisive moment, he reached for the transmission button, sending the encrypted message to Earth. Lantas's face contorted with shock and fury. "You fool," he hissed, lunging forward. But it was too late. The message had already been sent. The warning was on its way, and for the first time, Varash allowed himself a flicker of hope. As Lantas grabbed him, Varash knew the consequences of his actions. He had just signed his death warrant, but he also knew that this message, this warning, could be the key to turning the tide of the war. The humans would be ready. They had to be. And with that, Varash prepared himself for the storm that was about to hit, knowing that no matter the outcome, he had done what was necessary. He had given the humans a fighting chance. Varash was dragged through the dark corridors of the warship, his wrists bound tightly behind his back. His heart pounded in his chest as he was hauled toward the holding cells. He could feel the eyes of the Othiri soldiers on him, their cold stares filled with disdain and suspicion. The message he had sent, his last act of defiance, was already too far gone to be stopped. It had reached Earth, and the humans would be ready. The Othiri could not erase what had already been set in motion. Lantas followed behind, silent but unmistakably seething with anger. He had been a friend once, but that bond had been shattered in the moments it had taken for Varash to make his choice. He had betrayed the Othiri, and in doing so, he had betrayed everything Lantas stood for. As they reached the holding cell, Lantas turned to Varash, his voice low but filled with venom. "You have doomed us all, Varash," he spat. "Do you understand that? You've crossed the line, and now there's no going back. The humans won't save you. They won't save anyone. This will be our end." Varash met Lantas's gaze without flinching. "The end of the Othiri," he said quietly, "is already written. I've only given the galaxy a chance. You will see that soon enough." The words stung, but Varash had no regrets. The humans were resilient, yes, but they were more than that. They were an unyielding force of nature, the last safeguard the galaxy had against those who sought to dominate. If the Othiri were blind to that truth, they would learn the hard way. Varash had done what he could, and now it was in the hands of the humans. The door to the cell slammed shut behind him, and the sound echoed through the silence. Alone now, Varash sank to the cold floor, his mind running through the events that had led him here. He had been warned, but it hadn't mattered. He knew the Othiri would never listen. They were too proud, too blinded by their own power. And now, as the hours passed, all he could do was wait. The countdown to Earth's destruction had already begun. Kajan's invasion fleet was in position. There would be no mercy. Yet, in the depths of Varash's heart, he felt something unexpected, a flicker of hope. The humans had the advantage now. His message had been received, and if they were as adaptable and resourceful as he had seen, they would find a way to turn the Othiri's arrogance against them. The days seemed to stretch on forever. His mind replayed the mission over and over, each moment an intricate part of a larger plan. He had always known that confronting the Othiri directly would be impossible, but perhaps, just perhaps, the humans would find a way to defy the odds. They had done it before. And then, in the dead of night, a soft sound broke the stillness of the cell. The door to the holding chamber opened, and a figure stepped inside. Lantas, though his expression was far different from the fury Varash had last seen. "You're not dead," Varash said, surprised by his old friend's unexpected visit. "I thought you'd be the one to execute me." Lantas didn't respond immediately. Instead, he placed a small, hidden device on the floor. "You're not the only one questioning the path the Othiri are on," Lantas said softly. "The fleet's been ordered to move out, but I've seen the reports. Varash, there's something strange happening on Earth. The humans, they're not acting the way we expected." Varash's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" Lantas looked over his shoulder, ensuring no one was watching. "I don't know exactly, but I've seen the reports from the reconnaissance teams. They're preparing in ways that we've never seen before. They have something, a weapon, or maybe a force we can't understand. It's like they knew we were coming, and they're already one step ahead of us." For the first time, Varash allowed himself to feel a spark of hope. The humans had been given the time they needed. They had prepared. "You're telling me they can win?" Varash asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lantas nodded slowly. "Maybe. Maybe not. But one thing's for sure. They're not going down without a fight." Varash stood, his body aching, and reached out for the device Lantas had left. It was a small portable communicator, a lifeline to the outside world, a final chance to speak to those who could stop the Othiri. "Thank you," Varash said quietly, his voice filled with gratitude. Lantas gave him one last look, full of uncertainty, before disappearing back into the shadows. As the communicator powered up, Varash's mind raced. The humans were ready. It was now or never. The fate of the galaxy rested in their hands. With a deep breath, he activated the transmission, sending a single, simple message. "The Othiri are coming. Prepare."